Hi, I'm Hayley, Camille's mum. So the first signs Camille was poorly, it was really noticed by my mother-in-law. She had said that she'd noticed Camille had been walking around with her head on the side, and I honestly just put it down to a toddler thing. I wasn't too worried about it. And then we went on holiday to Disneyland, and Camille wouldn't eat while we were away. She was very sleepy, and then when we got home we noticed she started vomiting quite a lot. So that was the beginning of several visits to our GP and to the hospital that we were referred to, but it took a while before she received a diagnosis. We received Camille's diagnosis approximately 2 months after we'd started seeing the symptoms. We'd gone backwards and forwards to the hospital. I was beginning to feel like I was being treated as one of those mothers. It was obvious she was losing weight. She was very skeletal. You know, she was just sleeping all the time. She was misdiagnosed 2 or 3 times, and it wasn't until I suggested, are you going to do an MRI, that it suddenly occurred to them we should do an MRI. So we actually went into the MRI. I went in with her, and they'd done a lot of blood tests and there was no sign of any issues, so I was quite comfortable going into the MRI. And it was a summer afternoon in June, and almost immediately after the scan we were took to a side room where Camille was still under a GA, and we were told there was a large growth in her brain and that it was serious. So when we were told that there was a large mass in Camille's brain, it just changed our lives forever, and I'm not sure we really knew the impact at that moment, because nobody mentioned the cancer word, and there was part of me thinking, oh, that's fine, we'll get it removed. And then slowly the reality sunk in, and as the consultant kept talking, I can only describe it as feeling like an out-of-body experience, like that I was being recorded and this was some sort of game show. The other way I've described it over the years is this feeling, and I think those feelings came later when we got more information, and it just felt very much like being buried alive, because there's no running away from it. Nobody can click their fingers and make this better, and as her parents that's what we're meant to do. And she was only 2 years old at the time. She was so lovely and beautiful, she still is, and so precious to us. And I can't, even now we're 15 years on, and I still can't adequately put into words that devastation, and our lives have never been the same since. Camille was immediately blue lighted up to Addenbrooke's Hospital after diagnosis, where she was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. They scheduled her in for an operation the next day to take the pressure off her brain, which was successful. There was meetings with the surgeon, and we were told her tumour was inoperable. And I think the words that were spoken was, your little girl is very poorly. After that, it's really a bit of a blur, because we had to wait for her tumour to be diagnosed, and we knew that the results of that would tell us what path we were going to go down. The biggest fear was a cancer that couldn't be treated. Camille was diagnosed with an ependymoma, which, although can be quite resistant to chemo, it can stabilise the tumour. So we were very quickly put onto, it was a 1974 baby brain protocol. So it's a protocol that's now almost 50 years old. It hasn't actually changed in 50 years. And Camille underwent 16 months of chemo. And during that time, she was getting infections every other week. She was very poorly. We nearly lost her to sepsis, to meningitis. It was 16 months of absolute hell. My other daughter had to pretty much go and live with her grandparents because we were just managing it between us. It was very rare that we actually got a weekend together over that time. And then after 16 months, she got the sepsis, she got a really bad infection. They couldn't carry on with chemo. And so the only option we had at that point was neurosurgery. And the surgeon at Adam Brooks wasn't confident he could get it all out, so we actually sent her scans around the world and got a second opinion from Hay, who had a surgeon there who felt he could get it all out over, 2 or 3 operations. So that's the road we went down. And luckily, as a result of that, Camille met the criteria for proton therapy, which isn't available in the UK. So we had to fly over to Florida, and we lived there for about 4 months while she underwent daily general anaesthetics and underwent 33 rounds of proton therapy, which was the maximum that they would allow her to have. We flew back, and thankfully, we flew back 13 years ago, and she's had 13 years of clear scans. So the impact Camille's diagnosis had on the family was profound, as you can imagine. I had to give up a successful career to be her full-time carer. Martin, although still working, was very much supporting us at the same time, so was really fitting work in where he could, and luckily he had a job that enabled him to do that. Chia, our eldest daughter, she was only 4, she was still really young and was at nursery, and she just had to fit in. We gave her as much love as we could. We let her know all the time she was just as important as Camille. But ultimately, she ended up pretty much living with our in-laws. My relationship with my husband, I could say it strengthened it, and I can say that now. But at the time, I struggled. I felt so low, and I knew there was no way out of the situation. Even the ultimate way out, there was no way out for me. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I lost a significant amount of weight. And whereas Martin was still able to operate, I'd go to bed at night and I'd be crying all night, and Martin would just be, sleeping soundly next to me. And you laying there resenting him for it as well, and the fact that he could go to Adam Brooks and eat Burger King while I was, couldn't stomach anything. So it definitely had an impact on us, I would say, up until a few years ago. And I can now say we've come out of it a lot stronger, and we've got this shared experience. If either of us had met a new partner, they could never understand what we've been through. So it's a bond. Really, it certainly doesn't hold us together, but it's a bond that only we can understand. So Martin and I reacted very differently to Camille's diagnosis. I literally didn't want to know anything. I have never seen, even 15 years on, I've never seen one of Camille's scans. Martin and my father-in-law had to go to the meeting with the neurosurgeon because I literally couldn't. I was a complete mess. I got to the point where I was literally begging Martin to make this better, find a way to make it better. And because he's so solution driven, I felt he was the best person to ask that from, because even though neither of us had any experience in oncology, I knew he would do everything he could to find a way, whereas I knew if I started looking at data, it would just drag me down even further. There's a lot that Martin didn't tell me, and I'm really grateful to him to this day that he didn't tell me, because I honestly don't know how it would have gone, how my path would have gone. I know I would always have been there for Camille, but I think my mental health would have been really challenged if I'd have known just how bad it was. Her prognosis at the start, we asked the consultant and he wouldn't actually give us a percentage. He said, I work from difficult, very difficult and incredibly difficult, and Camille's case is incredibly difficult. So we knew the odds were stacked against her, but there's always a part of me that never gave up hope. And even, when there were times it was very much we could lose her tonight. And there was something in me that never felt that I was going to lose her over treatment. So you can have a really almost, it can affect your mental health, and you can think worst case scenario, but actually when it comes down to this could be it, I always had faith in Camille, I had faith in the surgeons and the team around her, and I think that's what got us through those years of treatment. So Camille is 17 now. She was diagnosed at 2. There are some disabilities through the neurosurgery treatment that she had, the resection of the brain tumours, but most of the significant damage, if you want to call it, came from the proton therapy, even though it was a safer form of radiotherapy for her. Camille is learning disabled. She's, as I said, she's 17, but she's probably mentally around the age of 9 or 10. She does have severe hearing loss, eye issues, she's got palsy of the face. She has to have growth hormone therapy. The treatment destroyed her pituitary gland, so she has to have medicine to help her with that. She can't walk a distance, she can't really leave the house on her own. She has walking aids and mobility scooter. So it's impacted her a lot, and it's impacted the wider family, because we've always, obviously, as I've said, she has Lucia, her older sister. She also, just after she finished treatment, we had a son called Jude, and he's never really been aware of what Camille has gone through, so we have to be quite careful with him, because he knows she's different, but he can't really understand why. So we have to carefully tread through that with him without scaring him. So that's been difficult, and that's where Tom's Trust has definitely helped us over the years, giving us advice on how we should discuss or have those type of conversations. But Camille is at college. She's at a specialised college. She's doing a foundation course which should lead her on to hopefully become independent and do some voluntary work, and we're really hopeful for her future. When Camille was diagnosed, we asked for help with our emotional support, mainly for me. Martin had his way of dealing with it, but I was completely astounded when I was told there was no real emotional support or counselling available. So throughout Camille's treatment, we really didn't have that support, and it wasn't until post-treatment that Tom's Trust came along, and we had the support of Angela, one of the psychologists. It was across board as well, so Angela would speak to other therapists, she'd talk to speech and language therapy, so we felt that Camille was getting the whole breadth of support services outside of physical treatment that she could receive. So Tom's Trust and Brainbow at the time coordinated all of that for us, and it was incredible. So we saw what wasn't available, and then we suddenly entered a world where, wow, this is incredible, this is available to us. So Camille has been to see Tom's Trust psychologist. She spent lots of time with Angela and other psychologists. Camille doesn't have much of a memory around what happened, and we've also always known it's a very thin line to, you don't want to talk too much about it, you don't want to talk too little about it, but you don't want to upset her and scare her, about what the future might hold. So again, with Angela's support, she's really helped us to achieve that balance. And Camille is, considering everything she's been through, again with the support of the team at Tom's Trust, she's incredible. She sometimes has a little worry, and she'll want to talk about something, or if she has a headache, or an earache, or, we have to make sure she knows it's okay, and it doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. But we wouldn't have had the tools to do that without the support of Tom's Trust and the team. Camille was only 2 when she was diagnosed, so she wasn't at nursery. She was at a private nursery 1 day a week, but obviously she left when she was diagnosed. The worst thing for Camille being in the hospital was she was nearly always isolated because of fear of infection, or she just had chemo treatment and her neutrophils were down. So for almost 2 years, she didn't interact with any other children apart from her sister. So when treatment ended, and we then decided we wanted to make life as normal as possible for her, so we enrolled her into a nursery. And it was really difficult because Camille still had the bald head, she still had an NG tube. She was still, although she was finished treatment, there was still a lot of overhang from the treatment she'd had. So we were really lucky with the nursery. They treated her so well and really looked after her. She got an SEN statement quite early on, which I'd really encourage any parents to get as soon as they can, because that's really helped us throughout the school years. At school, for the first few years it was fine because Camille, you know, she was going along nice, steady with all of her peers. And then it went from being all nice to them going up here and her coming down here just because she couldn't keep up with the learning. Again, the school were great. She had a great SEN support team, but unfortunately, and this is the case with a lot of children diagnosed with brain tumours, they're not necessarily bullied. What they are is isolated, and that's probably one of the hardest things we've had to deal with, is that she was isolated from friendship groups. She wasn't encouraged to make, or she was encouraged to make friends, but it just wasn't reciprocated by her peers. She wasn't invited to birthday parties, which we knew were happening. And that gap just widened and widened, and it was really hard. You know, the staff at the school did their best, but you can't force children to play with another child. And then through to high school, that really carried on, but she had a wider SEN team, whereas at her school, she was one of the only children with an SEN statement. So at least at high school, she had other peers in a similar situation who might have been diagnosed with autism, etc. But it's been really difficult for her. School is not easy for a child who's gone through what she has, and social isolation is one of the biggest issues facing these children. In terms of what we need now, we've seen our daughter go through transitions from nursery to primary school, from primary school to high school, from high school to college. We've also currently, given her age, she's now transitioning into adult services with the NHS. We're at a situation at the moment where Camille hasn't had a scan for 2 years, and we're comfortable with that because she's well. But we at a stage where we just don't know whose responsibility that is at the moment. It seems like care has almost, going out of childhood services has almost stopped. The transition has happened into adult services, but we've not been given a nominated consultant's name. We've not had an appointment yet to do an initial, you know, let's meet Camille and let's find out about her, and, you know, let's have a plan of action in case there is symptoms, or, you know, let's start thinking about when we might want to do a scan, just, you know, to keep an eye on what's happening. So we've had nothing. That's since she was 17, which was 8 months ago. We've had nothing. We have a school transition officer type role. There needs to be a lot more impetus put into that role, because ultimately that's a huge change for these children, going into different school establishments, understanding the hierarchy of different schools and understanding the rules, etc. We did get that through Tom's Trust, which was incredible. You know, we had a school liaison officer, and she was great, but she could only give us a certain amount of time. So I'd like to see a lot more time dedicated to that role and helping children like Camille as they go through the education system. So when I think of Tom's Trust, I always think of Tom, who we were on a ward with when Camille was poorly. And obviously I think of Debs, his mum, who's created this amazing legacy to Tom. It means so much to us that they were there, albeit after Camille's treatment. The support, looking back now, pre-treatment and post-treatment, it's just been outstanding. We know we can pick up the phone and call the team at any time, and they will very quickly help us with whatever we need. I had a discussion with somebody last week about getting Camille a formal learning disability diagnosis, which we haven't had yet. And The next day I received all the forms. Tom's Trust are putting their own case study, if you like, forward to get Camille a formal diagnosis. I think if we'd have gone through the NHS and attempted to do that, it would have been a lot more difficult, and there would have probably been quite a waiting list. Camille is also waiting for a diagnosis for autism. I've spoke to Tom's Trust, and I know with their help they will expedite that diagnosis and help her get the support she needs. Camille is transitioning into adult services, but the support is still there for her at the moment as an older teenager. So whilst the NHS aren't necessarily, that support has been a little bit more difficult to achieve, we have that continuity with Tom's Trust that we can really rely on, and they've just been fantastic, really have. One other thing we'd love for Camille is for her to meet more peers who have been through what she has been through. Having a brain tumour and going through that treatment is rare, and the effects of that treatment you can't just sum up in a sentence. It's a multitude of emotional, mental, physical disabilities and painful memories that they've gone through. And I think it would really help Camille and children like her to be around other children who've been through it, where it's not necessarily a situation where they're sat in a circle and let's talk about your feelings, but organically, they're allowed to discuss what they went through, and in an environment where it's safe play, safe talking. There might be somebody in there who's motivating them to talk about what they went through and encouraging that conversation across the peer group. But we haven't had that because brain tumours are so rare, and we only know of 2 other children in this area who have had brain tumours. And every journey is different. We know that, it's not going to duplicate what Camille's been through, but I just think it would really help her and children like her.
Hi, I'm Martin, I'm Camille's dad. I don't think anything can ever prepare you for the news you get when your child is diagnosed with such a serious illness. And I remember just breaking down after the doctor had left the room and just left Hayley and I to it. And for the rest of the day I was quite emotional, and then I woke up in the morning in what was old nurses' accommodation, like emergency overnight accommodation that they put me in at Adam Brooks, and I cried again a lot, and then realised that actually what I needed to try and do was be as strong as possible for Hayley and Camille in the situation that we were in. And I don't know if I cried then in front of them again at all throughout the whole process. And it wasn't because I didn't want to. I think it was just that trying to be as resolute as possible and trying to be as positive as possible for them too. If I think back about how I was treated and whether I was treated any differently to what Hayley or Camille was treated during the whole process, I think I hadn't really thought about it too much, but I probably was. The thing is, I was going into more sort of technical meetings with the neurosurgeon and things like that, and trying to understand the process and the science behind it a little bit more, and therefore the conversation I was having was very clinical, whereas actually what Hayley and Camille were going through was much more of the emotional state, I think, and that probably actually was detrimental to both me but also Hayley as well, because she couldn't escape the emotion. And then I couldn't open that part up. So actually I think it was probably difficult for both of us being pigeonholed a little bit. Throughout the treatment we spoke to lots of different professionals from across different services in the hospital. Obviously with the doctors and the nurses, everything is quite clinical. And if you don't want an honest answer, don't ask them any questions, because they will give you the answer which is safe clinically, obviously right clinically, but very cautious as well. What we found was actually when we spoke to the psychology team or the specialist nurses sometimes as well, there was the ability to be a little bit more open in the way that we were feeling about things or ask questions that were unknowns. And there's lots and lots of unknowns when your child is going through what Camille did. What that does is just enables you to ask questions knowing that you're not going to get a clinical answer back, and actually sometimes it's a little bit more reassuring that someone's actually just listening rather than actually trying to think of an answer which seems cautious or safe. I think what we needed to do at the time was just offload some of the queries in our minds. And you always felt that they were going to take it away and maybe try and find an answer. My mental health throughout the process, I didn't probably realise that there was an impact, if I'm honest. I think what I'm quite good at, and subsequently through work and things like that, I've done lots of psychometric tests and things. What I'm able to do is very much go into process, and my desire to be in a process is much higher when I get under high levels of stress. So actually going through the treatment cycle with Camille and trying to understand what the next step would be was quite comforting to me. So being process driven, seeing a process in front of me and there was steps to go forward was really, really important. I think what subsequently happens when she stops treatment and then has to try and step into a normal life is you realise you've probably bottled up lots and lots of emotions over many months and years. And it doesn't come out very often, but it can. And it can expose itself in just this, I'll call it an explosion of emotions, but it can be quite a powerful experience when it does happen. I think the other thing actually generally is both Hayley and I have become relatively hardened to normal life. So it's really difficult to empathise with normal circumstances, although we definitely try and we do the right thing. It's sometimes what would seem incredibly difficult for a normal family doesn't seem as difficult and as painful perhaps as it does for us. And that's really difficult when you're trying to maintain strong friendships and connections with people who haven't been what you've been through. And I guess probably that's why a lot of families who have been through these kind of circumstances do gravitate towards each other. So Tom's Trust is an incredibly important service for us and for many other families probably in the same situation as us. I think one of the things, as I've mentioned already, is the ability to just open up and have a safe place to talk to. I think it's really important that you're not judged for either being too low, too emotional, too guarded, actually, and having the support of a team like Tom's Trust have formed at Addenbrooke's and other places is incredibly important for us just to have that space to be able to talk openly. I don't know if we opened up enough during the whole process, and actually if we had any issues now, I think we'd find it a lot easier to drive a conversation and to actually be self-reflective. I think at the time we were so worried about Camille's health that actually we didn't reflect on our own too much. The other thing as well, I think that Tom's Trust team is really good at with parents in particular is flagging and highlighting when there may be issues around mental health. I think the normal behaviours of families in the ward, and they're there a lot, or at appointments with the Brainbow team in Addenbrooke's or other places, has enabled the Tom's Trust team to identify any particular areas of concern. And I think that's really important to try and get things early and try and start the conversation as early as possible with the parents to help them through that journey.